How do you become a full expression of your true authentic self? I'm Junala Magote, and in this video I'm going to discuss about Gestalt Therapy and how it might help a couple of the more common presentation that our people come into therapy for. So let's dive in. Gestalt Therapy is a focus therapy that helps you heal and resolve like unfinished business and all past painful dynamics that recurring in the present in the now. The main aim is to help you raise your awareness of self, how you operate in the world, and how you might be remaining stuck from there. We move into being more responsible for who and what we do, and that's the ownership part, but also more self-response able, able, that means I'm more able to respond to my own needs of my own self issues as they arise. Gestalt is one of the original therapies that many other therapists have blossomed from through, meaning the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Gestalt was formed from several other different therapies back in 1950s. Fritz and Laura Perls got together and formed Gestalt therapy. Fritz wasn't happy with the way Freud was very fixated and fixations and going back into the past, and so Gestalt is a very now focused therapy. Gestalt therapy also uses the phenomenological approach. So what this means is that rather than interpreting or analyzing, the therapist seeks to understand the subjective experience of the client. It also focuses on the I, and this is different from the I-it relationship, where we kind of see the other person as not an equal. So in the I though relationship is where we want to connect in fully and be a human in the room with our client rather than being an expert. Gestalt therapy will often bring in their own experience of what's going on, and this is how people learn how to be in a relationship. It's a relationship that heals. Gestalt roughly translates to mean is greater than the sum of its parts. However, in the process of growing up, we do fragment into parts of self, the parts that are acceptable to our parents, our peers, school, and parts and the other parts that are not. People are not seen as sick or dysfunctional through the lens of Gestalt, but of having made adaptations and developed strategies to deal with things that have happened to them or the relationship that they were in as children with the parents. And well, we need to develop these strategies to cope as a children. What happens is they keep running, and now we're adults, we don't necessarily need them anymore, but we get stuck in them, and they're seen as repeating patterns that are desiring closure in the present. This is known as unfinished business in Gestalt. So it's the unresolved issues from the childhood, the unmet perhaps, relational traumas or traumatic experience, or the ways that we had to adopt, the parts of ourselves that we had to hide or deny and disowned, that maybe we need now in the present, because we are always seeking wholeness. um, we are always seeking to complete the you know and the Gestalt we want to finish, the unfinished business. And this is why therapy is making the unconscious conscious, but much of what we do is out of our awareness. So the unnecessary strategies that we develop in order to cope and survive as children, it keep ganang habit habitually repeating in the now. And so by raising our awareness of what we are doing and how we are blocking our own growth forward, how we are repeating our unconscious pattern by bringing this up into awareness, we have the potential to integrate this experience and then possibility of change. The main avoidance to growth are seen in the defense mechanism of projection, interjection, retroflexion, and confluence. Now I know these are big, overwhelming words, so let's look at them one by one. Interjection is how we took thoughts or beliefs and sometimes feelings of others close to us without analyzing if they were ours, or if they were if if we really believe that they were true. Projection is where we have a part of ourselves that we don't want to own. It's pushed away, but what happened is that because that quality is actually part of us, we see it showing up many different places in the world. And in effect, in effect, we project out onto other people what is actually a part of ourselves. Retroflexion is doing to myself what I would rather do to others, or doing to myself what I would like others to do for me. Now, the retroflexion is where the anger, unfortunately, gets turned back in on the self, and this can be show up in a self blame or self judgment or self looting. I'm a bad person, this is why people are angry at me, or it can go to other forms of self harm. Unfortunately, actual self harm is a way of avoiding getting in a full contact with ourselves or others as confluence. Now, confluence is an interesting one. It's where we agree not to disagree. So we'll just go into agreement with with what they're saying rather than standing up for ourselves and asserting what we would really like to do, or what we really think. Now, Gestalt therapy also works from polarities, and polarities are like the opposite extreme of a behavior or a belief or a part of self. And one of the primary polarities and most people personality is the split between that inner voice, that inner critic, that what Gestalt therapists called the top dog, and the inner argument or the inner child, or what that is the split between that inner voice, that inner critic, what Gestalt therapists called the top dog, and the inner argument or the inner child, or what the Gestalt therapist called the underdog. Now, this is a split where we have that voice in our head telling us what we should do and shouldn't have done, and how we need to do this and that. No. And it's kind of bully. It's that inner critic voice, it's the conglomeration of parental values, judgments and directives that occurred in the greater landscape of the social situation. So this is kind of how we get socialized. So I've talked about how these things might have developed in childhood, that Gestalt is very focused on what is happening now, because so many times we are either in the past thinking about what we did, what happened, or in the future thinking about what we could do and what's going to happen next, by actually getting in the present and looking at what we are feeling and experiencing now. This is the only point from which we can change. We cannot change the past, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So by being in the now, we get more of our energy back, and we get more choice restated, you know, about how we are going to react. But we also learn about ourselves, and aware of uh, aware of how you're interrupting your own goals, desires, natural urge to unfold and grow. When you are aware of this, you can take responsibility for them, and you can also be more responsible, able to respond to yourself and your own needs. If you need to do that, or able to ask for them to meet, and your own needs, if you need to do that, or able to ask for them to be met. So Gestalt therapy is not a set of tools or techniques, because a lot of people know about the two-chair dialogue, and they know about the hot seat, or they know about these little bits and pieces that they borrow and think they're doing gestalt. So it's a whole system of how we flow through a cycle of contact and awareness, which I'm not going to dive into, because I think there's been so much theory in this already. But let's talk about the famous technique in Gestalt therapy, the two-chair dialogue. So how the two-chair dialogue works is that we use another chair to either put a part of client in there, or a person in the client's world in relationship. So I'll describe each one of those. I've talked before about the top dog, underdog, and how you can have that dialogue between the bullying. You shouldn't have done that. You're silly, stupid, whatever. And underdog are, yes, I know, or I'm bad, I'm wrong. So what you can do is actually sit that bullying part, that inner critic part in one chair, and sit the defensive one, and the underdog, the sabotaging, but the conceding in one another chair, and let them have it out. And it's really good way to understand the dynamics that goes on in your head all the time. So I'll give you a common example or presentation that people come into therapy for, and how Gestalt might work with that one. Two main things that people present to therapy with are anxiety and depression. Often they go together. With anxiety, we look at through the Gestalt lens, we look at what are the inner conflicts within this person, because when you've got two different parts of self at war within your mind, you get a conflict, you get a friction, and that friction itself can create this feeling of anxiety. It's like being torn. It can also happen when you're trying to make an important decision, or what you want to make decision for yourself that you know might go against what you think is expected of you. An example would be, say, the eldest son of a family has gone through 2 years of university and doesn't like it anymore. He wants to live pursue his career, his acting career, but there's a conflict within him because he knows that his highly professional, driven parents are not going to like that. So he's got the part that wants to do what he wants to do and find joy in that, and the part that know he is expected of him and what he should do, and there's a conflict in that. And depression. So for a long time, psychotherapists saw depression is a su- suppression of an emotion. We know that anxiety and depression can have any biological to them, but we can also examine what might be might like might have brought on a shorter term depression. So when we look at suppressed emotions, these can be ones like anger or passively unresolved grief, but we can also suppress our joy, our happiness. Perhaps you were brought up in a family that was very, very stern. There was never much laughter or frivolity or happiness or fun. So you learn to be a very stoic person. But as an adult, what happened is you've lost access to your joy, and you don't know how to go out and have fun or be spontaneous, and this can be problematic, and it can be cause a low grade feeling of depression. There's part inside that sort of stuck and pushed pushed down. So whether it's anger or sadness or grief, it's worthwhile to look at what emotions could be underlying and not being expressed. So how can a therapist help someone navigate deep and tricky emotions if they haven't been there themselves? But the important element is that Gestalt therapy. Ultimate goal of Gestalt is wholeness in the form of maturation. You're not doing any of your childhood strategies anymore. You're in you're in full awareness of all the stuff that you do that gets in your own way, and you're able to responsible for that and responsible to yourself, and then you can let the natural process of growth and change unfold. The Gestalt is also a very good vehicle for spiritual growth because, as Eckhart Tolle said, being in the now is also stepping outside of your ego and becoming the observer and the process of awareness of self. We do exactly that in Gestalt therapy. We look at the dysfunctional, or the parts of the ego that are split off, the parts of us that are stuck in earlier stage of development development conditioning as a whole, all of the things that we were told that we are not necessarily, that we are part of who we truly were. And so by working through the layers of the ego and the conditioning, we become more transparent. And this is exactly what enlightenment is. Adjacent said is enlightenment is the lightening of the ego. So rather than the ego being this foggy foggy bit with arguments, conflicts, split off parts parts that stuck, unresolved or unfinished business. Block in our capacity for contact with self and other. Repeating patterns, we can become more whole, we can become more integrated, and we can make our ego for more transparent. And in doing this, we are growing spiritually, because the ego is a chameleon. it it will shift itself into whatever shape that we think we want. The ego will do anything to avoid its own demise. So it's imperative and spiritual growth that we are also working on our ego with someone who is wiser and more knowledgeable about these things in ourselves. Because what happens if we try and do it alone? We will fool ourselves. So the skills of a good Gestalt therapy is balancing this atonement, the phenomenological way of stepping inside your subjective experience of being empathic to that, with enough challenging so that you don't know, to get away with your old tricks and continue to repeat the patterns that happen. And so this is how Gestalt is very relational. So I hope you enjoy this video on understanding more about Gestalt therapy, where it came from, what its basic principles and techniques are, and also it might work to help you become a whole, fuller, more mature, involved person.